There comes a point when the confusion around an avoidance behavior no longer controls you. When you stop questioning why they pull away, why they shut down, and why they hide from real intimacy, the power dynamic shifts completely. The truth is, avoidants operate from patterns that seem complicated on the surface, but once you truly understand the core of their behavior, everything changes.
Yeah.
And that's when their armor begins to crack. This is not about chasing, fixing, or begging them to change. It's about recognizing what's really happening, standing in your own strength, and watching how the game unravels when you finally see through the illusions. When you finally begin to understand that avoidants thrive on mystery, everything starts to make sense. Their distance, their sudden withdrawal, the way they disappear when things begin to feel too close, none of it is really about you. For so long, you may have felt confused, questioning if you did something wrong, replaying conversations in your mind, trying to analyze every little detail. But the truth is, avoidants operate through a protective shield, and that shield is built on silence and secrecy. Their mystery is not power, it's a defense. They learned long ago that keeping people guessing gives them control, and for a while it works. You keep chasing, keep asking, keep trying to bridge the gap, and in doing so, you reinforce the very pattern that makes them feel safe. But the moment you realize this, when you stop reacting with desperation, you change the entire dynamic. Because here's the secret avoidants crumble when they lose the ability to confuse you. When you no longer see their silence as rejection, but as avoidance, you stop panicking. You stop asking yourself, what did I do wrong? And instead think, this is just their way of protecting themselves. And that shift is everything. It takes away their hidden advantage. Avoidants thrive on the fact that others don't fully understand them, that people will try endlessly to decode their behavior. But once you crack the code, you take back your power. Think about it. Mystery only works when it remains a mystery. If you can see through the fog, there is no fog left to hide in. Their silence becomes predictable. Their withdrawal becomes a pattern you can name. Their detachment becomes something you no longer take personally. And when that happens, the energy flips. Instead of you chasing clarity, they are left exposed, wondering why you're no longer shaken by their disappearing act. Avoidants crumble, not because you confront them with anger or demand answers, but because you no longer need to. You don't play the guessing game. You don't wait by the phone. You don't waste energy trying to solve puzzles they create. You rise above it. And once you detach from the confusion, you leave them with nothing to control. Their shield of mystery collapses, and for the first time, they are left facing themselves instead of hiding behind the reaction of others. That's when the crumble begins, quietly, subtly, but powerfully. They may present themselves as strong, self-sufficient, and completely independent, but the truth is far more complicated. Avoidants wear independence like armor, but that armor often hides a heart that quietly craves connection. On the surface, they'll insist they don't need anyone, that they're fine on their own. That closeness feels suffocating, and for a long time, you might believe it. You might think they're simply different, that they are wired not to need intimacy the way you do. But when you begin to see deeper, you realize that their distance is not a lack of desire, it's a fear of exposure. They want love, they want closeness, but they are terrified of what might happen if they allow themselves to truly feel it. That's why the illusion of independence is so powerful for them. It keeps you believing they're untouchable. It makes you question whether they really care at all. Yet deep down, there are cracks in that image, moments where their vulnerability slips through. Maybe it's in the way their eyes soften for a second, or in how they linger longer than they mean to, or how their silence feels more like longing than rejection. Once you recognize these signs, you see past the mask they've carefully built. And that's when their strength doesn't look so solid anymore. The reason this matters is because avoidants crumble when someone can see them clearly without being intimidated by the false aid. They don't expect anyone to notice that their independence is often just a wall, a barrier designed to protect a very tender inner world. And when you recognize that truth without judgment, without fear, you quietly take away their power. Because suddenly they can no longer convince you that they don't care. They can no longer hide behind coldness or distance as if that makes them impenetrable. You've seen the truth and they know it. What unsettles them most is that your understanding strips away the illusion they've worked so hard to maintain. They're not invincible. They're not unaffected. They're not as detached as they want you to think. And when you stop being fooled, when you no longer see their coldness as true independence, you change the balance completely. Their shield weakens because now they're vulnerable in a way they can't escape. Someone finally sees them for who they are. And that realization is where the crumble begins. Avoidants have mastered the art of pulling away, and for a long time, that tactic works because it triggers panic in the other person. The sudden shift, the warmth turning cold, the presence turning distant, creates a wave of confusion. Most people instantly assume they've done something wrong, and in that panic, they start chasing, pleading, trying to fix what isn't broken. This is exactly what the avoidant expects. Their withdrawal is not random, it's a strategy born from fear. They push away, waiting for you to come running after them, because the chase gives them reassurance without requiring them to face intimacy. But here's the twist: when you stop falling for this pattern, when you no longer scramble to close the gap, everything changes. The power in this moment is subtle but profound. Instead of reacting with desperation, you respond with calm. Instead of chasing, you remain steady. Instead of losing yourself in their silence, you stand firm in your own worth, and this is something avoidants do not anticipate. They count on your confusion to keep them in control. They count on your anxiety to validate their importance. But when you refuse to play the game, when you don't feed the cycle, their strategy falls flat. The silence they once used as a weapon becomes meaningless because it no longer provokes the reaction they crave. Think about how powerful it is to shift from asking, "Why are they doing this to me?" to saying, "This is just their pattern and I don't need to chase." That shift removes the fuel that keeps the push and pull dynamic alive. Suddenly, it's not you who feels powerless, it's them. They can withdraw all they want, but instead of pulling you in closer, their distance starts to highlight their own emptiness. They realize the control they thought they had is slipping, and with it, their sense of security begins to crack. Avoidants crumble in these moments because they are no longer the ones directing the emotional dance. You've stepped off the stage entirely. You're not begging, you're not proving, you're not fighting to be chosen. And that calm refusal to engage forces them to sit with themselves, something they spend their whole lives trying to avoid. The absence of your reaction leaves them exposed face to face with the reality that their tactics no longer hold power. And that's when the crumble begins, because the game they relied on no longer works. At the core of every avoidant lies a constant battle between fear and desire. They want closeness just as much as anyone else. But the moment it begins to feel real, the moment vulnerability comes into play, panic sets in. It's as though two voices inside of them are at war. One whispering that they want connection, and the other screaming that closeness is dangerous. This is why avoidants are so unpredictable. One day they seem warm, attentive, and present, and the next they vanish into silence, leaving you wondering what went wrong. But the truth is, nothing went wrong at all. You simply brushed against the walls of their fear, and that triggered the retreat. The problem is that when you don't understand this cycle, you get pulled into it. You start to believe that their distance means rejection, and that belief drives you to chase harder, to prove yourself, to fight for reassurance. That reaction, however, only deepens the cycle because the closer you reach, the faster they run. This back and forth dynamic can last for months or even years, leaving you exhausted and questioning your worth. But once you finally see the cycle for what it is, a loop of desire and fear, you step outside of it And that changes everything. When you can name the pattern, you no longer take their retreat personally. You recognize it as part of their inner struggle, not as a reflection of your value. Instead of chasing after them when they pull away, you remain calm, grounded, and centered. And that calmness is powerful because it removes the fuel that keeps the cycle spinning. You stop feeding the fear that drives them, and without your reaction, they are left facing their own contradictions. This is where avoidants begin to crumble. For the first time, they are not able to hide behind your pursuit. They are left sitting in the discomfort of wanting closeness while being terrified of it. They are forced to face their inner split without the distraction of someone else trying to fix it for them. And when you step out of the loop, when you no longer get dragged into the endless push and pull, their carefully constructed cycle begins to collapse. They realize the game is no longer working, and in that realization, their defenses start to crack. Avoidants often behave as though they are the ones who control the rules of connection. They decide when to come close, when to disappear, when to speak, and when to retreat. For a long time, it feels like you're left with no choice but to adjust yourself around their shifting moods. But the truth is, boundaries are the very thing they secretly respect the most. On the outside, they may test limits, pushing against your patience, ignoring your needs, or trying to make you bend toward their comfort zone. Yet deep inside, what unsettles them most is someone who holds firm without anger, someone who refuses to abandon their own standards just to keep the connection alive. At first, avoidants expect you to compromise endlessly. They expect you to explain yourself, to prove your intentions, to lower your expectations so that they don't feel pressured. But the moment you stop begging for attention and instead calmly set the tone, something shifts. You say more through your silence than through any argument. You no longer plead for answers, you no longer chase clarity, and you no longer tolerate being kept in emotional limbo. And when you take that stance, they feel something they didn't expect: respect. Boundaries do what chasing never can. They show strength without hostility. Avoidants crumble when they realize they can no longer pull you in and push you away at will. They may try at first to resist, to see if you'll bend, but when they discover that your limits are steady and unshakable, they begin to feel the weight of their own behavior. They see that you're not afraid of losing them, that you're willing to walk away rather than accept disrespect, and that realization rattles the foundation of their control. What they fear most is someone who refuses to play by their unspoken rules. And when you enforce your boundaries consistently, you flip the script. You are no longer the one waiting for permission to be valued. You've already chosen to value yourself. Avoidants may not admit it, but this unnerves them. Their pattern doesn't work anymore. Their wall isn't impenetrable anymore. And as they face a version of you who knows what they deserve, they begin to crumble because the comfort of control has been stripped away. Boundaries expose the truth they've been hiding from, that they are not the only ones who get to decide how close or distant love can be. The deepest collapse for an avoidant comes when you understand them better than they understand themselves. For so long, they rely on your confusion to keep the upper hand. They hide behind their patterns, silence, withdrawal, emotional walls, believing these moves will keep you uncertain and chasing. But the moment you see through it all, when you can name their behavior without taking it personally, the illusion shatters. They are no longer the mysterious figure in control of the connection. They are simply a person running from their own fears, and you finally recognize it. This understanding strips away the power they once had. When you no longer question your worth in response to their distance, you stop feeding their cycle. When you no longer interpret their coldness as rejection, but as fear, you stop giving their silence the reaction they expect. Suddenly, they cannot manipulate the emotional rhythm anymore. And that is when avoidants begin to feel exposed. They realize the mask they've worn for years doesn't work on you. And that realization cuts deep. What unsettles them most is not your anger, not your withdrawal, but your calm clarity. You're not fighting them, you're not begging, you're not confused. You simply see them. And being seen in this way terrifies them because it forces them to face the truth they've avoided for so long. They are not as detached as they pretend. Their need for love, their fear of intimacy, their contradictions are laid bare and they can't hide. This kind of exposure makes them crumble because it removes the very shelter they've relied on, the belief that no one truly understands them. When you reach this point, the dynamic shifts forever. You no longer feel powerless in the connection because you've taken back control of your emotions. You've stopped playing the guessing game, and by doing so, you've broken the cycle. The avoidant is left in unfamiliar territory, face to face with someone who doesn't buy into their defenses, someone who sees their patterns clearly, someone who won't be manipulated by fear. And in that moment, they begin to unravel. Because the strongest defense an avoidant has is confusion, and when that weapon no longer works, they have nothing left to hide behind. That's when the crumble becomes inevitable, because clarity is the one thing they cannot control. When you finally step back and see the truth, the entire game changes. Avoidants no longer hold power over you because their patterns are no longer a mystery. You've learned that their silence is not rejection, but protection. You've seen through the illusion of independence and recognized the craving for connection they try to bury. You've stopped chasing, stopped reacting, and broken free from the endless cycle of fear and desire. By holding firm boundaries, you've reclaimed your strength, and by understanding them more deeply than they understand themselves, you've stripped away their greatest shield, your confusion. The crumble doesn't happen because you forced them to change, beg them to stay, or fought to prove your worth. It happens because you no longer play the role they expected you to play. And when you rise above their patterns with calmness and clarity, they are left face to face with themselves. That is the moment their defenses begin to fall apart. And that is the power of truly understanding an avoidant.